Hello, sixth graders. So we are going to talk about RIW today, which is how you classify numbers in math. So RIW stands for rational integers and whole numbers, and each number goes in a certain place when we are classifying. So the way this works is in the most middle circle, we are going to have whole numbers, okay? And I like to remember this because it's in the middle. It's like a donut hole. So whole numbers go in the middle of our classification, okay? And there are some things we need to remember about whole numbers. First of all, they are always positive. So whole numbers are positive. So if you have a negative number, it is not a whole number. So positive. And then they can have no fractions or decimals. So no fractions or decimals. So these are essentially the numbers you have been working with since you were in kindergarten, when you learned to count. 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are our whole numbers. So 1, 2, 3, 100, 216. Those are all whole numbers. They are positive. They have no fractions or decimals, okay? But then I also want to point out there can be some tricky ones because they're always trying to trick us. So some tricky numbers that we need to look for, okay? So the tricky ones is you could have the same whole number of 2 and then they could put 0.0. And you might be thinking, but that has a decimal. But does that 0.0 really matter? No, it's invisible. So it's just 2 wholes still. So that could be a tricky one when they put a 0 as the decimal. They could over write a fraction that can be divided into a whole number. So like 10 over 2, because 10 divided by 2 is really 5. So if your fraction can be divided into a whole number, that could also be a tricky one. And then we have also discussed whole numbers go over 1, so they could write something like 7 over 1, which is still just 7, okay? So those could be some tricky ones. Those are still all whole numbers because the fractions are still whole numbers, and then that decimal 0 doesn't really count. All right, so the next circle we have moving out are integers. So here we have discussed integers recently on our number lines. So integers is our next example. Okay, and our integers are our negatives. Okay, they are negative because whole numbers are positive, so integers are negative. You can still have no fractions or decimals though. No fractions or decimals. So these are all of our negative whole numbers. So -1, -2, -3, -4, -15, okay? Anything that is negative, no fractions or decimals. We could have -172, okay? And then let's talk about the tricky ones because they're always going to be tricky. So tricky would be a negative with that decimal 0. So -2.0, it is still just -2. They could do another fraction, so -25 over 5, because that divided would just be 5 wholes. And then they could also do a negative whole number over 1, so -3 over 1 would still just be a -3. So integers are negative, no fractions or decimals still. Okay, and I do need to also point out that whole numbers sit inside the integers. So our integers include the whole numbers. So whole numbers are also integers. So integers can be negative and positive. So those go inside each other. So we could say wholes are also integers. So integers hold both of those because they are inside. We work our way out. Okay, and then our last circle would be the R, which is rational. And we have also recently discussed rational numbers. We put them in order. So rational numbers hold everything. So they can be positive and negative because they hold both. So we're just going to put the symbols, positive and negative. That's an and sign. And these are fractions and decimals. This is where they live. Okay? So anything that has a fraction or a decimal is going to be rational. So we could do something like 1/2. Okay? It's a fraction, it's rational. We could do a mixed number. So like 5 and 1/2. So if I divide that fraction, it's still gonna stay a 0 point something or 5 point something. We could have something like 16.3. It has a decimal. Those are all positive, but they have a fraction or a decimal, so they are rational. We could even do negatives. We could do -3/4. So it's a fraction, it is automatically rational. Even though it's negative, it doesn't go in integer because integers have no fractions or decimals. We could have -0.62 because it has a decimal, okay? And there are really no tricks as long as it's a fraction or a decimal. I do want to go back out and talk about our arrows though. So whole numbers are not only also integers, they are also rational because rationals hold positives as well. Integers are also rational. So you start from the middle and you work your way out. So you could say wholes and rationals. Sorry, not rationals. Wholes and integers are also rational. So if it's a whole number, it is also an integer and a rational. But we just need to really pay attention to wholes are positive, no fractions, decimals. Integers, negative, no fractions, decimals. Rationals can be both positive and negative, but they are our fractions and decimals. So that is how you classify numbers. If I give you a number, you should be able to put it in the correct spot.